Elena Bittencourt held a heavy gold pen hovering over the contract that would decide the ultimate fate of her family's legacy. The air conditioning in the penthouse boardroom was set to a freezing temperature, yet a single bead of cold sweat traced a slow, agonizing path down her spine. For 30 years, this woman had wielded power like a blunt weapon. She had judged people by the shine of their shoes and the exclusivity of their zip codes. She had built walls of arrogance so high that she could no longer see the reality on the ground. But today, those walls were not just cracking, they were turning to dust. The silence in the room was not peaceful, it was predatory. It was the kind of silence that precedes an execution. Elena was about to sign away the empire her father had built, the empire she had ruthlessly guarded, to a mysterious investor known only as the Phoenix Group. It was her only salvation. The banks had closed their doors, the creditors were circling like vultures. This signature was the only thing standing between her and absolute ruin. But in that frozen second, as her eyes drifted to the bottom line of the document to verify the buyer's name, the air turned to ice in her lungs. It wasn't a corporate entity she didn't recognize. It wasn't a faceless conglomerate. The name printed in bold black letters was a name she knew intimately. It was a name she had spoken with venom on her tongue only 6 months ago. It was the name of the girl she had thrown out of her mansion like garbage. Elena looked up, her hand trembling uncontrollably, and realized too late the brutal truth of the universe. Money can buy comfort, it can buy silence, and it can buy fear, but it can never, ever buy immunity from destiny. They thought she was weak because she was kind. They thought she was stupid because she was quiet. They were wrong. If you enjoy seeing the mighty fall and the humble rise, subscribe to this channel right now and activate the bell notifications. What you are about to hear is not just a story, it is a warning. It is proof that the person you humiliate today might be the one holding the keys to your survival tomorrow.
It wasn't a corporate entity she didn't recognize. It wasn't a faceless conglomerate. The name printed in bold black letters was a name she knew intimately. It was a name she had spoken with venom on her tongue only 6 months ago. It was the name of the girl she had thrown out of her mansion like garbage. Elena looked up, her hand trembling uncontrollably, and realized too late the brutal truth of the universe. Money can buy comfort. It can buy silence, and it can buy fear, but it can never, ever buy immunity from destiny. They thought she was weak because she was kind. They thought she was stupid because she was quiet. They were wrong. If you enjoy seeing the mighty fall and the humble rise, subscribe to this channel right now and activate the bell notifications. What you are about to hear is not just a story, it is a warning. It is proof that the person you humiliate today might be the one holding the keys to your survival tomorrow.
To truly understand the magnitude of this collapse, we must step back from the edge of the cliff and look at the world that created this disaster. We must look at the golden cage inhabited by Lucas, the sole heir to the Bittencourt fortune. To the outside world, Lucas lived a dream. He resided in a sprawling mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home, surrounded by high walls topped with electric fences and armed guards who patrolled the perimeter with the seriousness of a military operation. Inside, the floors were made of imported marble so polished you could see your own reflection and your own flaws. But for Lucas, this luxury was a prison. His life was scripted before he was even born. His parents, Elena and Roberto, did not see a son when they looked at him. They saw an asset. They saw a continuation of the brand. Affection in that house was a transaction. I love you was replaced by, I bought you this car. I am proud of you was replaced by, you must not embarrass us. Lucas grew up suffocating under the weight of expectations, surrounded by people who smiled with their teeth but never with their eyes. He was starving for something real in a world made entirely of plastic and gold.
Desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of his home, Lucas found sanctuary in the only place where his last name didn't matter, the city's old public library. It was a building that smelled of dust, old paper, and rain, a stark contrast to the sterile lemon-scented air of his mansion. It was there, among the towering shelves of forgotten history, that he saw her, Clara. She was not the kind of woman his mother would have selected from a catalogue of debutantes. She wore no jewelry. Her clothes were simple, functional, worn at the hems, but meticulously clean. She worked there as a volunteer, organizing books with a quiet, almost religious dedication. To the high society that Lucas belonged to, Clara was invisible. She was part of the scenery, just another face in the gray crowd of workers who kept the city running. But Lucas watched her. He watched how she treated the books with respect. He watched how she smiled at the elderly patrons, a genuine warmth that lit up her face.
For the first time in his life, Lucas felt the magnetic pull of authenticity. He approached her not as the heir to an empire, but as a man looking for a book he couldn't find. Their first conversation was hesitant. He was afraid she would recognize him and treat him with the fake deference he despised. She was afraid he was just another bored rich boy looking for amusement. But as they talked, the masks fell away. They spoke about literature, about philosophy, about the dreams they were too afraid to say out loud. They began to meet every day. For Lucas, those hours in the library were the only time he felt able to breathe. He learned that Clara lived in a neighborhood his mother would never drive through, even with the windows up and the doors locked. He learned that she took 2 buses to get to the library. He learned that her parents had died when she was young, victims of a system that crushed the poor to feed the rich. But strangely, she wasn't bitter. She was focused. She had a steel core beneath that soft exterior.
What Lucas did not know, what nobody knew, was what Clara did when she wasn't organizing books. He saw her simplicity, but he missed her complexity. Clara was not just surviving, she was building. Every night in her small, cramped apartment, she sat before an old, humming laptop. While the world slept, Clara was awake. She was a self-taught prodigy of the financial markets. She had taken the tiny insurance payout from her parents' death and through sheer intellect and calculated risk was slowly, quietly turning it into a fortune. She operated under pseudonyms, moving through the stock market like a ghost. She was accumulating wealth not to buy yachts or mansions, but to buy her freedom. She kept this secret locked away, terrified that if people knew, she would attract the wrong kind of attention, the kind of parasites that infested Lucas's life. But love makes us reckless. It blinds us to danger. Lucas, intoxicated by the feeling of being loved for who he was and not for what he owned, made a fatal miscalculation. He believed that if his parents could just meet Clara, if they could just see the purity of her soul, they would look past her bank account. He believed that humanity could triumph over classism. He was young and he was naive. The date was set for the company's 50th anniversary dinner. It was the most important social event of the season. Senators, judges, and tycoons would be there. Lucas invited Clara. She hesitated. She knew that world better than he thought she did. She knew that wolves do not welcome sheep to the dinner table unless it is to eat them. But she looked into Lucas's hopeful eyes, and she couldn't say no. She agreed to go. She spent 3 nights sewing her own dress, a beautiful, modest piece in pale blue. It was elegant, but it lacked the aggressive shine of designer labels.
The night arrived. The Bittencourt mansion was lit up like a supernova. Valets were parking Ferraris and Bentleys. When Lucas's car pulled up and he stepped out holding Clara's hand, the atmosphere shifted. As they walked through the massive oak doors, the chatter in the room didn't stop, but it changed tone. Eyes scanned Clara from head to toe, pricing her outfit, analyzing her hair, judging her worth in milliseconds. Then they saw Elena. She was standing at the top of the grand staircase, looking down like a queen surveying her subjects.
When her eyes landed on Clara, there was no warmth, no curiosity. There was only a cold, clinical assessment. Elena didn't scream. She didn't make a scene. That would be vulgar. Instead, she offered a tight, thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. She descended the stairs, the sound of her heels echoing like gunshots on the marble. "Lucas," she said, her voice smooth as silk and cold as ice, "I see you've brought a guest." She didn't introduce herself to Clara. She didn't offer her hand. She simply gestured toward the dining room. "Come, we have a special place for you." The special place was a masterclass in humiliation. The main table was a display of crystal and silver, reserved for the family and the most powerful guests. But Elena had instructed the staff to set a single extra chair. It wasn't at the main table. It was set slightly apart, near the swinging doors of the kitchen, a spot usually reserved for personal assistants or nannies. It was a physical manifestation of where Elena believed Clara belonged, in the service of her betters.
Lucas turned red with fury. He opened his mouth to protest, to demand a seat at his side, but Elena cut him off with a stare that could freeze lava. "Don't make a scene, Lucas," she whispered, her voice dripping with menace. "Don't embarrass us in front of the investors. She sits there or she leaves." Clara squeezed Lucas's hand. She felt his trembling rage. She knew that if he exploded now, he would lose everything. And she, the woman who had faced poverty and loss, was not afraid of a bad seat at a dinner table. She looked at Lucas and nodded slightly. She walked to the isolated chair and sat down with her back straight, chin up, radiating a dignity that made the expensive jewelry of the other guests look cheap by comparison. But the dinner was just the beginning. As the courses were served, dishes that cost more than Clara's monthly rent, Elena began the interrogation. She didn't shout. She spoke loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, masking her cruelty as polite conversation. "So, my dear," Elena said, swirling her wine, "Lucas tells us you live in the East Zone. Is that correct? I hear the crime rate there is terrifying. Do you feel safe walking at night, or are you used to that sort of environment?" Laughter rippled through the room, polite, cruel laughter. Clara placed her napkin on her lap. "It is a community of hard-working people, Mrs. Bittencourt. We look out for each other. Safety comes from unity, not just from electric fences."
Elena raised an eyebrow. The girl had teeth. That annoyed her. She decided to press harder. She decided to draw blood. Elena did not like resistance. She was used to people crumbling before her. The fact that this girl, this nobody, dared to speak about community and unity at her table was an insult she could not abide. The main course was cleared away, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. The waiters, sensing the violence in the air, moved like ghosts, trying to be invisible. Elena signaled for dessert, but she had no intention of letting anyone enjoy the sweetness. She had one final card to play, a card she believed no poor person could ever defeat. The morning of the meeting was gray and unrelenting. Rain lashed against the windows of the limousine as Elena, Roberto, and Lucas drove toward the headquarters of Holding Phoenix. The building was a monolith of glass and steel, piercing the skyline, a symbol of the future looming over the decaying empire of the past. Elena spent the entire ride fixing her makeup, checking her pearls, and rehearsing her speeches. She was terrified, but she masked it with a layer of aggression. "We go in there," she told Roberto. "We sign the papers, and we demand to stay on the board of directors. They need our expertise. They can't run this company without the Bittencourt name." Lucas stared out the window, watching the city blur by. He didn't say a word. To him, this wasn't a business meeting. It was a funeral. He was burying the last remnants of his life before disappearing into obscurity. He planned to sign the papers and then leave the city forever.
They arrived. The security in the lobby was tight.
They were escorted not to a regular conference room, but to the penthouse office. The elevator ride was silent and uncomfortably long. When the doors finally slid open, they stepped into a space that smelled of power. Minimalist furniture, modern art, and a view that stretched to the horizon. In the center of the room sat a massive desk made of black obsidian. Behind the desk, a high-backed leather chair was turned away from them, facing the storm clouds outside. The CEO was waiting. Elena cleared her throat, stepping forward with her chin high. "Good morning," she announced, her voice echoing in the vast space. "I am Elena Bittencourt. We are here to finalize the acquisition, but before we sign anything, I have a few stipulations regarding my position in the new hierarchy." The chair did not move. Silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Then, slowly, methodically, the leather chair began to swivel. When the figure in the seat was finally revealed, the air left the room. Elena's jaw literally dropped. Roberto grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. Lucas, who had been looking at the floor, raised his eyes and froze. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an old man in a suit. It was Clara. But this was not the Clara of the library. This was not the girl in the homemade blue dress. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that fit her like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a sharp professional style. She wore no makeup, yet she looked more radiant and terrifying than anyone Elena had ever met. Her hands were clasped on the desk, resting next to a file labeled Project Bittencourt.
She slid the contract across the table. "This is the deal. I am acquiring the Bittencourt Group. I am saving the jobs of the 2,000 employees you were about to fire. But there is a clause. Clause 4A. You, Elena, and you, Roberto, are stripped of all executive powers immediately. You will receive a pension, enough to live comfortably, but you will never step foot in this company again. Your era of terror is over." Elena looked at the contract. She looked at Clara. For the first time in her life, she had no weapon. Her money was gone, her status was gone, her pride was shattered. With a trembling hand, she signed the paper. It was the signature of a defeated woman. Then Clara turned to Lucas. The room went quiet. Lucas hadn't moved. He was staring at her with a mixture of shock and awe. He didn't see the CEO. He saw the girl he loved, standing tall, vindicated. He saw justice. "And you, Lucas?" Clara asked, her voice softening just a fraction. "Are you going to sign? Are you going to take your share of the buyout and run?"
Lucas looked at the papers. Then he looked at his parents, defeated and small in their chairs. Finally, he looked at Clara. "I don't want the money," Lucas said. His voice was hoarse but firm. "I never wanted it. I only wanted you." He took the pen, but instead of signing the acceptance of his millions, he signed a waiver, relinquishing his inheritance entirely. He put the pen down. "I am leaving with nothing," he said to his parents, "because that is the only way I can be free of you." He turned to leave the room. He didn't expect Clara to forgive him. He didn't expect anything. He just wanted to escape. "Lucas," Clara called out. He stopped at the elevator doors. "My foundation needs a director," she said. "Someone who knows what it's like to live in a golden cage and wants to help others break out of theirs. The pay is average, the hours are long, but the boss, well, she has a soft spot for you."
She said yes. This story is a reminder to us all. The world is a spinning wheel. The arrogance of the tower creates the rebellion of the basement. Never look down on someone unless you are helping them up, because the person you treat like nothing today might be the person signing your paycheck tomorrow, or eventually always wins. If this story touched you, if you believe in the power of humility, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, if you were Clara, would you have given Lucas a second chance? I'll see you in the next story. With a slow, deliberate movement, Elena reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a checkbook. The sound of the leather cover snapping open was louder than a gunshot in the quiet room. She uncapped her gold pen and began to write. She didn't look down. She kept her eyes fixed on Clara, a predator locking onto its prey. She wrote a number followed by many zeros, a number that could buy a house, a new life, perhaps even a soul. She tore the check from the book with a sharp rip and slid it across the polished mahogany table. It spun slowly until it stopped right in front of Clara's plate, next to the untouched dessert fork. "Let's stop pretending, shall we?" Elena said, her voice raising just enough to silence the entire room. "We all know why you are here. You are a smart girl. You found a weak boy with a big inheritance. It's a classic strategy. But I am a businesswoman, and I know that everything and everyone has a price. That check is for more money than you or your parents have ever seen in your entire lives. Take it, leave my son alone, walk out that door and never come back." The room gasped. It was a public execution of character. Lucas stood up so fast, his chair toppled over backward, crashing onto the marble floor. "Mother, stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You don't know what you're doing!" But Elena didn't even blink. She kept staring at Clara. "I know exactly what I am doing, Lucas. I am taking out the trash." Clara looked down at the check. The paper trembled slightly, not because she was scared, but because the air conditioning vent was blowing directly onto it. She saw the number. It was a fortune. For anyone else in her position, that piece of paper was a lifeline. But for Clara, the secret millionaire, for Clara, the woman who had built her own empire in the shadows, that piece of paper was something else. It was an insult. It was proof that these people understood the price of everything and the value of nothing. Slowly, Clara stood up. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She picked up the check with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. She looked at Elena, and for a brief moment, a flicker of pity crossed her face. "You poor woman," Clara said softly. The guests leaned in, shocked. Had she just pitied Elena Bittencourt? "You think this paper is power. You think this makes you strong. But you are weak. You are terrified that without this money, you are nothing. And you are right." Clara let the check drop from her fingers. It fluttered down and landed on the floor, face down, like a dead leaf. "I don't want your money, Elena, and I don't want a place in a family that is so emotionally bankrupt." She turned to Lucas. Her eyes were wet now. "I love you, Lucas, but I cannot save you from them. Only you can do that." And then she walked away. The sound of her cheap shoes on the expensive floor was the only sound in the universe. Lucas tried to run after her, his heart hammering against his ribs, but his father, Roberto, signaled the security guards. 2 massive men blocked the doorway. Lucas screamed Clara's name, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. She knew that if she turned around, she would break. She walked out into the cold night, leaving the golden cage behind. Inside the mansion, Elena sipped her wine. "He'll get over it," she told the guests, dismissing her son's agony with a wave of her hand. "They always do." But Elena was wrong. Lucas did not get over it. In the weeks that followed, the heir to the Bittencourt empire became a ghost in his own home. He stopped eating with the family. He refused to attend board meetings. He spent his days locked in his room or wandering the city, haunting the library where they had met, hoping to see her. But Clara was gone. She had quit her volunteer job. She had moved out of her apartment. She had vanished into the mist of the city, erasing her tracks completely. Lucas fell into a deep, dark depression. But while he was mourning the loss of his love, something else was happening. Something subtle, something catastrophic.
The karma that Elena laughed at began to take effect. It started small. A week after the dinner, a major supplier for the Bittencourt manufacturing division suddenly canceled their contract. No explanation given, just a legal notice. 2 weeks later, a scandal broke out regarding the working conditions in one of their factories. It hit the news cycle hard. The stock price dipped. Elena dismissed it as fake news, refusing to address the core issues. She was too arrogant to apologize. Then, the financial bleeding began in earnest. Investments that had been stable for decades suddenly turned sour. It was as if the market itself had turned against them. Or perhaps there was a shark in the water, a predator that smelled blood.
"You," Elena whispered, the words strangling in her throat. This is a joke. How did you get in here? Where is the CEO?" Clara didn't blink. Her voice was calm, deep, and resonated with absolute authority. "I am the CEO, Elena. Holding Phoenix is my company. It has been for 5 years." The reality crashed down on Elena like a tidal wave. The girl she had humiliated, the girl she had offered a check to disappear, was the one holding the pen that would decide her fate. The realization was physically painful. Elena's legs gave out and she sank into a chair, pale as a ghost. "But you were a librarian," Roberto stammered. "You were poor." "I was discreet," Clara corrected him. "There is a difference. While you were busy spending your inheritance on parties to impress people you hate, I was building mine. I cleaned floors to remind myself where I came from. I organized books because I value knowledge over status. And I stayed silent because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not for what I have." Clara stood up and walked around the desk. She stopped in front of Elena. "You told me that everyone has a price, Elena. You were right. You just didn't realize that your price was your integrity. And today, I am buying it." Unknown to the Bittencourts, a new player had entered the game. A shadow corporation known only as Holding Phoenix began aggressively buying up the debts of the Bittencourt group. Every time a bank loan came due, Holding Phoenix was there to buy it. Every time a partner wanted to sell their shares, Holding Phoenix bought them. It was a hostile takeover in slow motion. It was surgical. It was precise. 6 months passed. The atmosphere in the Bittencourt mansion changed from arrogance to panic. The servants were fired to cut costs. The Bentleys were sold. The parties stopped. Elena and Roberto spent their days screaming at lawyers, trying to plug the holes in a sinking ship. They were losing control. They were being cornered. Elena, now looking 10 years older, her face etched with stress and sleepless nights, couldn't understand it. "Who is doing this?" she would scream at the empty walls. "Who is destroying us?" She never suspected the truth. She never suspected that the phoenix rising from the ashes was the girl she had tried to buy off with a check. Clara was out there. She wasn't organizing books anymore. She was sitting in a high-rise office on the other side of town, surrounded by screens, watching the graphs turn red for the Bittencourts and green for her. She wasn't doing it out of spite. She was doing it because the market is a brutal teacher, and the Bittencourts were failing the class. They were inefficient, cruel, and outdated. Clara was simply correcting the market. And then the final blow arrived. The bank called. The Bittencourt group was insolvent. They had 48 hours to pay a debt of millions where they would lose everything. The company, the brand, the properties, the mansion, everything. Roberto collapsed into a chair, defeated. "It's over, Elena. We are bankrupt." Elena paced the room, manic, refusing to accept defeat. "No, there must be a way. We need an investor. We need a partner." The phone rang. It was their head lawyer. His voice was trembling. "Mrs. Bittencourt, we received an offer, a full acquisition offer. It covers the debt. It saves the company from liquidation. But it comes with conditions." "I don't care about conditions," Elena shouted into the receiver. "Who is it? Who is the buyer?"
"It's Holding Phoenix, ma'am. The CEO wants to meet with you personally tomorrow morning to sign the transfer of ownership." Elena slammed the phone down. A wave of relief washed over her. She didn't know who this Phoenix CEO was, but she was confident she could charm them, manipulate them, or perhaps bully them into letting her keep her power. She smoothed her dress, fixed her hair, and looked in the mirror. The arrogance flickered back into her eyes. "I will survive this," she whispered. "I always do." Lucas, watching from the doorway of the study, felt nothing. He didn't care if they were rich or poor. He only cared that the world felt empty without Clara. When his mother told him he had to attend the meeting the next day to sign over his shares, he nodded numbly. He didn't know that he was walking toward the most shocking moment of his life. He didn't know that the universe was about to bring the pieces of the puzzle together in a violent collision of past and present. The stage was set, the players were in position, the final act was about to begin.
Lucas turned around. Tears were streaming down his face. Clara wasn't smiling, but her eyes were warm. It was an offer of redemption. It was a second chance. Lucas walked back. He didn't hug her, not yet. There was too much to heal, but he stood beside her, facing his parents. He had switched sides. The line was drawn. Elena and Roberto left the building that day as ghosts. They faded into obscurity, living out their days in a small apartment, complaining to neighbors who didn't care about their past glory. They never understood where they went wrong, but for Lucas and Clara, that rainy morning was the beginning of everything. Lucas worked hard. He earned his place in the world, not because of his last name, but because of his sweat. It took time, but the trust returned. And 2 years later, on a quiet afternoon in that same library, Lucas asked Clara to marry him. No diamond ring, just a simple gold band.